The phone buzzed on the coaster next to my laptop. A violent, angry vibration that rattled my very soul. In my new life as a stay-at-home dad in the beige-tinted purgatory of Maple Creek Estates, my phone only ever rang for one of two reasons. A DoorDash driver was hopelessly lost in the labyrinthine sameness of our cul-de-sacs, or a disaster of suburban proportions was imminent. I glanced at the caller ID. Principal Thompson. Disaster it was. "Alex," I answered, keeping my voice level. "Alex, they're gone!" Her voice was a frayed rope, threatening to snap. "All of them! The wires are cut clean through." I didn't need to ask what they were. I'd spent 2 weekends and a considerable amount of my own stockpiled hardware designing and networking the new security camera system for Northwood Elementary. 4 discrete, high-definition cameras covering the main access points. A gift to the community. A fun little side project to keep my brain from turning to tapioca pudding after a year of negotiating screen time and debating the nutritional value of dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. "The ones on the exterior? All 4? I asked, already pulling my chair closer to my 3-monitor command center, the glowing heart of my otherwise unassuming home office. "Snipped, like someone took a pair of garden shears to them," she lamented. "The district IT guy is on a cruise in the Bahamas, and the police said without witnesses, there's not much they can do." "What do I do, Alex?" I leaned back, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Because I knew. I knew exactly who did it. And I knew the police were wrong. There was a witness. A silent, all-seeing witness that the perpetrator had no idea even existed. Because less than 12 hours ago, I had been in a different kind of hell. 12 hours earlier. The Northwood Elementary School library smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I was trapped in a PTA meeting, a special kind of psychological warfare I was still adapting to. While the PTA president, a woman named Pam, with perpetually startled eyes, discussed the logistics of the upcoming fall bake sale, I was mentally re-architecting the school district's abysmal network firewall. They were using a consumer-grade router to protect the data of 600 children. It was a digital unlocked screen door, and it made my teeth ache. And so, if we can get at least 10 more parent volunteers for the brownie table," Pam was saying, "I think we can hit our fundraising goal." Ahem. The sound was small, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. Every head turned towards the source. Brenda Baxter. She wasn't even on the PTA. She didn't have to be. As the iron-fisted president of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association, she considered the school an extension of her personal fiefdom, a public utility that must adhere to her private standards. Brenda was a woman in her early 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could deflect small arms' fire, and a gaze that could curdle milk. She stood up, clutching her purse like it contained state secrets. "Pam, while the financial viability of our children's confectionery pursuits is admirable," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "I feel we are ignoring the elephant in the room, or rather the cameras on the building." A nervous murmur rippled through the dozen or so parents. "I am, of course, referring to the 4 new security cameras that have been affixed to our lovely school's brick facade," she continued, making air quotes around the word security. "Specifically, the 2 that face the street, overlooking the entrance to our esteemed community." I felt a muscle in my jaw tighten. I had personally positioned those cameras to maximize coverage of the school's public access points while minimizing any view of private property. They were discreet, painted to match the brick, and about as intrusive as a ladybug. "They are tacky," Brenda said, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "They are Orwellian. And frankly, they send a message that our neighborhood, a neighborhood which I have personally curated to be in the top 5% of desirable zip codes in this state, is a high-crime area. They are lowering our property values with every photon they capture." I couldn't help myself. I leaned over to the dad next to me, a guy named Mark who worked in insurance, and muttered, "Property values are more likely to be lowered by her offensively beige siding, which violates HOA Code 17B on approved earth tones." Mark's eyes widened in sheer terror, and he subtly shimmied his chair 2 inches away from me, as if I had just confessed to being a tax auditor. Brenda's radar-like senses picked up on my whisper. Her eyes narrowed, lasering in on me. "Is there something you'd like to add, Mr. Alex?" I said, offering a tight smile. "And no, I was just admiring the structural integrity of this library's ceiling tiles. Very robust." She wasn't buying it. "As I was saying," she huffed, turning back to her captive audience, "these things are an eyesore and a menace. Something must be done." She sat down with a dramatic finality, leaving a trail of Chanel No. 5 and implied threats in her wake. The bake sale was forgotten. The seed of discontent had been planted. Present day. "Daddy?" I swiveled in my chair. My 8-year-old daughter, Lily, stood in the doorway of my office, clutching a stuffed unicorn. "Hey, Sweet Pea, what's up?" "Mrs. Davison said we might have to cancel bike-to-school safety day tomorrow," she said, her lower lip trembling slightly, "because of the broken cameras." My heart did a painful little lurch. "I liked those cameras," she mumbled into her unicorn's fur. "They made me feel safe when I put my bike in the rack." And that was it. The switch flipped. The quiet, semi-retired, stay-at-home dad persona evaporated, and the old Alex, the one who used to hunt black hat hackers through the dark web for a living, took the controls. This was no longer about professional pride or a petty squabble with a power-tripping suburbanite. Brenda Baxter had messed with my daughter's sense of security. She had just declared war on the wrong guy. "Don't worry, Lilypad," I said, my voice softer than I felt. "They'll get the person who did it, and bike day is going to be just fine. Go get your helmet. We should practice our hand signals." She beamed and scampered off. I turned back to my monitors, my face a grim mask. I leaned into the microphone on my desk. "Okay, Brenda," I whispered to the empty room. "You wanted to go low-tech. Let's see how you like high-tech." My fingers flew across the keyboard, the clicks echoing in the silent room. "Computer, execute command string 07. A new series of windows populated my main screen. A logo materialized. A stylized nightingale bird made of circuit lines. My personal passion project. "Activate Project Nightingale," I commanded. Principal Thompson thought the school's security system was just 4 cameras wired to a DVR in her office. She was adorably mistaken. That was merely the visible tip of the iceberg. What I had actually built for the school district, pro bono, was a proof of concept for a federated community surveillance network. Project Nightingale was its code name. It was a sophisticated AI-driven data correlation engine. It legally and ethically, the consent forms were a masterpiece of fine print, linked into a web of public-facing cameras across the entire school district. Traffic cams, cameras on the public library, the community center, the town hall. As a beta test, it even had access to the doorbell camera feeds from a dozen nerdy and privacy-unconcerned residents who had signed up for my Neighborhood Watch 2.0 initiative. It was a perfectly legal, terrifyingly powerful God's-eye view of our sleepy little town. And I was about to use it to find a woman who snipped a few wires because she didn't like the aesthetic. It was like using a tactical nuke to kill a mosquito, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. "Nightingale," I said, my voice low and steady. "Show me all motion events within a 500-meter radius of Northwood Elementary. Time parameters, Last night, 2200 to 0400 hours. Cross-reference all human subjects with Maple Creek HOA resident roster. The monitors flickered, displaying a mosaic of grainy night vision feeds. A cat slinking across a lawn, a raccoon investigating a garbage can, a teenager sneaking out of his window. I mentally filed that last one away for future leverage. My program went to work, its algorithms churning through terabytes of data. It highlighted a dozen individuals. I filtered out the paperboy, the insomniac jogger, the teenager. The system flagged one hit that matched the HOA database. Isolate Subject 7, I ordered. A new window popped up. It was a feed from a traffic camera 2 blocks from the school, time-stamped 2:17 a.m. A figure, clad in a ridiculously floral, rose-patterned tracksuit, was scurrying away from the direction of the school. They were carrying a small aluminum stepladder in one hand and something small and metallic in the other. Trotting faithfully at their heels was a small, white, fluffy poodle. I leaned in closer, my heart thumping with savage glee. Enhance, subject facial profile, compare to district volunteer database. The image was grainy, but Nightingale's interpolation algorithm was a thing of beauty. It sharpened the pixels, corrected the lighting, and ran the comparison. A moment later, a picture flashed on screen. It was Brenda Baxter's official HOA portrait, right next to the enhanced image from the traffic cam, a 98.7% match. Brenda Baxter, I whispered, a slow grin spreading across my face. You magnificent idiot. I zoomed in on the poodle. And Napoleon, an accomplice. The entire process, from Principal Thompson's frantic call to positive identification of the perpetrator and her fluffy sidekick, had taken less than 5 minutes. The sabotage itself was a 3-minute job. The title of the police report in my head wrote itself. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. It was time to play the part of the concerned, clueless parent. The 2 officers who arrived looked like a casting call for a buddy cop movie. Sergeant Miller was the veteran, a man in his late 50s with a face like a road map of disappointments and a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of every petty crime committed in the county for the last 30 years. His partner, Officer Davis, was young, eager, and had that telltale glint in his eye that said he still believed he could make a difference. It was adorable. I met them out front, near the drooping, snipped wires, affecting my best, "Gosh, what a world we live in" expression. Principal Thompson was there too, wringing her hands. So, nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything, Miller grumbled, making a note on his pad that looked more like a doodle of a hangman's noose. Typical. It's just awful, Sergeant, I said, shaking my head in performative dismay. To violate the sanctity of a school, it's unthinkable. Time to have some fun? Well, I said, stroking my chin thoughtfully, if I had to guess, I'd say the perpetrator acted alone, probably between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. when the traffic on Main Street dies down. Miller stopped doodling and looked up at me. And how would you figure that? Just a hunch, I said breezily. They probably approached from the east side of the campus to avoid the motion sensor floodlight on the janitor's entrance. They'd need a small ladder, maybe 4 or 5 feet, to reach the cameras on the south wall, and judging by the general vibe of the crime, I'd say they were wearing something comfortable. Maybe floral? Principal Thompson stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. Officer Davis's pen froze mid-scribble, and he shot me a look of pure, unadulterated curiosity. Sergeant Miller's eyes narrowed into slits. And are you a private investigator, sir? He asked, his voice flat. Me? Oh, heavens no, I chuckled. Just a stay-at-home dad. I play a lot of strategy games on the computer. You know, Age of Empires, stuff like that. You just sort of learn to think tactically. Miller stared at me for a long, heavy moment, his expression conveying a deep, deep weariness. He finally let out one of his signature sighs. Right, strategy games. We'll, take that under advisement. We'll dust for prints, but with the morning dew, I wouldn't hold your breath. As they turned to leave, Davis dropped back for a second. That was a pretty impressive tactical assessment, sir, he murmured, a small grin playing on his lips. What was that game called again? Project Nightingale, I said without thinking. Huh, never heard of it, he said, jogging to catch up with his partner. I watched them go, a feeling of deep satisfaction settling over me. I had the culprit, I had the evidence, and I had just royally messed with a police sergeant's head, but my digital evidence was, for legal purposes, inadmissible. I couldn't just waltz into the station and say, my secret, semi-legal surveillance network caught her red-handed. I needed a new plan. I needed to fix the cameras, and for that, I needed an ally. It was time to call some contractors. This, I knew, was going to be its own special kind of hell. My first call was to a company called Slick Rick's Security Solutions. The name alone should have been a red flag. Rick arrived in a Tesla so white, it hurt my eyes. Wearing a suit so sharp I was worried he'd cut himself. He didn't look at the wires. He looked at the houses around the school. Okay, I see what we're dealing with here, he said, his voice smooth as silk. High-value residential area. You can't just replace these. You need an upgrade, a deterrent. I just need the wires reconnected, Rick. Alex, my man, think bigger, he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. We're talking about a synergistic security paradigm. I can outfit this entire campus with a platinum package. We're talking thermal imaging, biometric gate access, and a proprietary AI that can detect negative intentions before a crime even happens. I had to ask. Does it run on a blockchain? Of course it does, he said, his eyes lighting up. For maximum data integrity. I told him I'd think about it and deleted his number before his Tesla had even silently glided out of the parking lot. My second call was to Gary's Gadgets, a name I found on a flyer tacked to a telephone pole. Gary showed up in a windowless van covered in bumper stickers that said things like, "Birds aren't real," and "The earth is a donut." He squinted at the cut wires, sniffed the air, and then pointed a strange antenna-covered device at the school. Yep, just as I suspected, he muttered. The EMF readings are off the charts. It's the new 5G tower. It's broadcasting mind control frequencies, which agitates the criminal element and weakens copper wiring. Standard stuff. So, you're saying 5G cut the cables? Indirectly, he said, nodding sagely. The solution isn't more cameras. That just feeds the beast. You need to line the exterior walls with tin foil to block the signals and install a series of orgone energy accumulators at the property corners to harmonize the psychic vibrations. I thanked Gary for his time and made a mental note to check my own fillings for government transmitters later. I was losing hope. Then I found an ad in the back of a church bulletin, tucked between a notice for a potluck and a plea for choir singers. Kowalski Electrical. If it has a wire, I can fix it. No nonsense. An hour later, a rusty but clean Ford Econoline van rattled into the parking lot. A man who looked to be in his early 60s, with a thick gray mustache and hands like catcher's mitts, got out. This was Gus Kowalski. He walked over to the first camera, looked at the dangling wires for approximately 5 seconds, and grunted. Yep, wires are cut, he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. He moved to the next one. Same here. He looked at me. Looks like they used a pair of Craftsman cutters, an older model. Probably dull, judging by the fraying. I was impressed. How can you tell? 40 years in the business, kid. You see a lot of cut wires. He squinted at the cut. And whoever did it was hesitant. The cuts aren't clean and confident. A guy who knows what he's doing, a real thief. He just snips it once. Snap. This was personal. This was someone angry. He then looked me square in the eye. So, you want me to talk all day, or you want me to fix it? It's $500 for the parts and labor. Be done in 2 hours. You want it or not? I had found my guy. I want it, I said, a grin spreading across my face. But I might have a follow-up project for you. Something a little more custom. Gus just grunted again, which I took as a yes, and hauled a toolbox out of his van. As he worked, I felt the first real spark of hope. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. Now I just had to wait for my opponent to make her next move. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, the weekly Maple Creek Murmurs e-newsletter arrived in my inbox. And there it was, right under a recipe for 7-layer dip. An op-ed by Brenda Baxter titled Community Aesthetics and the Rise of Vigilante Surveillance. I nearly spit my coffee all over my monitor. She didn't use my name, of course. She was too clever for that. But the prose was a masterclass in passive aggression. She wrote of a certain new resident with a flagrant disregard for our community's hard-won visual harmony. She painted a picture of a neighborhood under siege, not by criminals, but by the aggressive, prying eyes of unnecessary technology. She finished with a flourish, suggesting the recent unfortunate incident involving the cameras was not an act of vandalism, but a passionate community response from someone pushed to their breaking point. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I seethed, reading the final line. "Perhaps if we focused more on planting petunias and less on planting listening devices, our neighborhood would truly be a safer place." I pushed back from my desk, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. My plan to simply get her caught was too small, too simple. She had maligned my work, justified her crime, and insulted petunias all in one fell swoop. This required a new level of engagement. This required Operation Petty Annoyance. Brenda wanted to fight on her home turf, the hallowed ground of the HOA rulebook. Fine. She had no idea that I had digitized that entire 300-page document, run it through an OCR scanner, and created a searchable database with cross-referenced bylaws. I was about to become the most pedantic, rule-abiding, pain-in-the-ass resident Maple Creek Estates had ever seen. And I was going to use Project Nightingale to do it. The war began that evening. 7:17 p.m. Nightingale's motion sensors on my neighbor's doorbell, Cam, 2 houses down from Brenda's, detected her rolling her garbage can back from the curb. I checked my database. HOA Bylaw 12, Section D, Paragraph 3. All waste receptacles must be removed from public view by 7 p.m. on collection day. She was 17 minutes late. I picked up my burner phone and used a voice modulator app, setting it to slightly disgruntled senior citizen. "Yes, hello?" I rasped into the anonymous HOA tip line. "I'd like to report a flagrant violation of Bylaw 12D. There's a can. It's just sitting there, menacingly. The audacity." The next morning, 8:32 a.m., a high-angle view from a traffic camera caught Brenda's poodle, Napoleon, lifting his leg on Mrs. Higgins's prize-winning petunias. I screenshotted the image, cropped out any identifying background information, and printed it in glorious color. I slipped it into an envelope with a simple, typed note. "Thought you should see this. A concerned neighbor." I dropped it in Mrs. Higgins's mailbox on my morning jog. The resulting shriek an hour later was audible from my office. The campaign escalated. I used a zoom lens from a community center camera a quarter-mile away, enhanced with Nightingale's stabilization algorithm, to capture a photo of a small, unapproved decorative gnome peeking out from behind a hydrangea in her garden. Another anonymous call. HOA tip line, how can I help you? It's the gnome, I whispered dramatically with my voice modulator. It's back, and this time, it looks like it's mocking me. I documented her nephew's beat-up Honda Civic parked on the street for 3 consecutive nights, a clear violation of the 48-hour rule. I reported the slightly too tall grass on her side lawn, a full 1/4 inch over the regulated 4 inches. I even used audio analysis from a nearby traffic cam microphone to flag her for excessive noise when she was using a leaf blower at 7:55 a.m., a full 5 minutes before the 8 a.m. start time for power tools. Each anonymous tip resulted in a crisp, white envelope appearing on her doorstep, an official warning from the HOA board she herself presided over. I imagined her tearing them open, her face turning a shade of puce that almost certainly violated the community's color palette guidelines. It was beautiful, but for all the satisfaction it gave me, it felt hollow. This was just trolling. Why did she really do it? The property values argument was flimsy. Brenda was many things, but she wasn't stupid. There had to be something more. Late one night, fueled by caffeine and spite, I decided to dig deeper. I tasked Nightingale with a new query. Cross-reference all HOA financial disbursements over the past 2 years with Brenda Baxter's known associates and family members. Flag all non-competitive contract bids. The system hummed. Data streams flowed. For an hour, I watched lines of code scroll by, sifting through public records, meeting minutes, and business filings. And then Nightingale chimed. A soft, pleasant tone that signified it had found something juicy. On the screen, 2 documents appeared side by side. The first was the minutes from an HOA meeting last year, where Brenda had vehemently and single-handedly shot down 3 competitive bids for the community's landscaping contract. The bids were from established, well-regarded local companies. The second document was the invoice for the company that ultimately won the no-bid contract, Baxter Botanical Beauties. The price was a full 40% higher than the highest of the rejected bids. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I ran a state business search. Owner and sole proprietor of Baxter Botanical Beauties, one Jeremy Baxter. Age 22. Address, same as Brenda Baxter. Previous listed work experience, assistant manager at Cloud9 Vapes. It was her nephew. My blood ran cold. I pulled up an archived image from Project Nightingale, taken a month ago. It was a wide shot of the entrance to the school. And I realized the camera she cut. Camera 4, the one with the clearest view of the street, had a perfect, unobstructed, high-definition view of the sad, patchy, and frankly pathetic landscaping work at the school's main entrance. Work that, according to another invoice I quickly unearthed from the school district's public portal, had also been done by Baxter Botanical Beauties. This wasn't about aesthetics. This wasn't about property values. This was about covering up fraud. She'd been funneling overpriced no-bid contracts to her vape shop manager nephew and was using HOA and school district funds to do it. The camera was a witness to his shoddy work, a lingering piece of evidence she couldn't control. The stakes had just been raised from a suburban slap fight to a legitimate criminal conspiracy, and I had her dead to rights. The next morning, I found Gus Kowalski packing up his tools, the last of the new cameras now gleaming on the school wall. The ones he'd installed were better than the originals. Hardened casings, encrypted signal, the works. "Morning, Gus," I said, handing him a cup of coffee from a thermos. "Kid," he grunted, taking a sip. "Good coffee." "Listen," I began, deciding to test the waters. "I've been thinking about this whole vandalism thing. I have a theory." He just raised an eyebrow, waiting. "It's just speculation, of course," I said, leaning against his van. "But what if someone didn't cut the cameras because they were ugly? What if they cut them to stop people from noticing that the premium organic mulch the school paid a fortune for looked suspiciously like free wood chips from the city dump mixed with dirt. Gus stopped what he was doing and walked over to the freshly landscaped flower bed near the entrance. He kicked at the mulch with the toe of his steel-toed boot. He picked up a piece and crumbled it in his fingers. "Huh," he chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "This ain't premium mulch. This is floor sweepings. Kid, you're a weird fella, but you ain't stupid." He looked from the flower bed to me, a new understanding in his eyes. "So that's the game." "That's the game," I confirmed. "And these new cameras you put in?" I gestured to his handiwork. "They're fantastic. Military grade almost." Gus grinned. "You planning on spotting gophers from space with these things?" "Something like that," I said. "Listen, Gus, the annual HOA picnic is this Saturday. I might need your help installing one more camera, a special one, strictly off the books." Gus's grin widened. He wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm listening." My next stop was Principal Thompson's office. I closed the door behind me. I didn't mention Project Nightingale. I didn't have to. I laid out the public record evidence I'd found, the rejected bids, the outrageous invoice from Baxter Botanical Beauties, the public business filing showing it belonged to her nephew. She stared at the documents on her desk, her face paling. "She used district funds for this?" she whispered, horrified. "I signed off on that invoice. She told me it was a special community-preferred vendor." "Brenda can be very persuasive," I said gently. "But I think there's a way to get the truth out, the whole truth. I've got a plan for the picnic on Saturday. It's a little unorthodox." Principal Thompson looked up from the damning paperwork, her eyes meeting mine. A flicker of something. Fatigue, frustration, and a strange sort of battle-hardened resolve passed over her face. "Alex," she said with a sigh. "Last week, an anonymous work order appeared on the maintenance log, complete with a 14-point strategic lubrication plan for my squeaky office chair. The chair no longer squeaks. At this point, nothing you do surprises me." She folded her hands on her desk. "What do you need?" The Maple Creek Community Park, on the day of the annual HOA picnic, was a spectacle of forced fun. A slightly deflated, bouncy castle listed to one side. The smell of burnt hot dogs hung heavy in the air, and families were spread out on checkered blankets, smiling with the strained pleasantness of people who are legally obligated to like each other. And reigning over it all was Queen Brenda, resplendent in a pastel pink pantsuit and a sash that literally said, HOA President. She moved through the crowd with the air of a monarch visiting her subjects, Napoleon the poodle trotting at her heels like a fluffy four-legged scepter. She had no idea the trap was already set. Phase 1 was the bait. The night before, Gus and I had installed it. On a tall light pole overlooking the entire picnic area, we had mounted a new camera. But this wasn't one of my discreet models. This was a monstrosity, a giant, black, ominous-looking device with a comically oversized lens and a huge, blinking red light. It looked like something that belonged on the outside of a maximum security prison. It was, of course, a complete fake. A hollow plastic shell with an LED light wired to a battery pack. Phase 2 was the rumor. I'd spent the morning seeding it among the neighborhood gossips. "Did you hear?" I'd say to one dad at the hot dog stand. "The school board is testing a new Ultra HD evidence-grade security camera. Principal Thompson said it's been recording all week to monitor for community event safety." The rumor spread through the picnic like wildfire. Phase 3 was the real trap. Hidden perfectly inside a rustic birdhouse that Gus had donated to the park and mounted on a nearby tree was the real camera. One of my personal toys, a 4K, low-light, micro camera with a high-fidelity directional microphone, all pointing directly at the power box for the light pole where our decoy was mounted. The feed was streaming directly to my phone. I sat on a blanket with Lily watching the show. I saw Brenda's eyes lock onto the giant fake camera. I saw her smile falter. I saw her talk to another board member who pointed up at the blinking red light. The seed of panic had been planted. Then, I saw her nephew, Jeremy, the botanical beautician himself, walk up to her, holding a half-eaten corn dog. Brenda grabbed him by the arm and pulled him behind the bouncy castle, right into the sweet spot of my hidden microphone. I casually put in an earbud, pretending to listen to a podcast. "Or, that's the camera I was telling you about." Brenda's frantic hiss came through loud and clear. "The one the school is testing." It's probably been recording for days. It probably saw everything. The wiring, the cheap mulch delivery, all of it. We have to disable it before the police see the footage from the vandalism. "Whoa, chill, Aunt B," Jeremy mumbled around a mouthful of corn dog. "You want a bite?" "No, I don't want a bite," she shrieked. "This is serious. My presidency, your business, it's all on the line. We have to do something tonight." I took a calm sip of my lemonade. Checkmate. As dusk began to settle over the park, the main event began. The annual outdoor movie night. The giant inflatable screen flickered to life with the cheerful animated logo of Paw Patrol, the movie. The children of Maple Creek cheered. The parents settled in, relieved to have their offspring sedated for the next 90 minutes. This was Brenda's moment. Under the cover of the movie's opening musical number, she crept away from her blanket. She thought she was invisible, just another shadow in the dimming light. But on my phone screen, in glorious 4K, I saw her every move. She clutched the same pair of dull wire cutters. She reached the light pole. She pulled a small stepladder from behind a bush. Gus and I had made sure to leave it there for her, and climbed up to the power box. I gave Gus, who was standing by the generator for the movie screen, a subtle nod. Brenda raised the cutters. She found the thick power cable leading to the dummy camera. She took a deep, fortifying breath. Snip! On the giant inflatable screen, Chase the police pup froze mid-leap. The entire movie went dead. The crowd murmured in confusion, and then the screen flickered back to life. But it wasn't showing Paw Patrol. It was showing a live, crystal-clear feed from the birdhouse camera, and projected 20 feet high for the entire community to see was their HOA president, Brenda Baxter, standing on a stepladder with a pair of wire cutters in her hand, having just vandalized what she believed to be school property. As if on cue, the audio I had recorded earlier boomed out over the PA system. "We have to disable it before the police see the footage from the vandalism!" A collective, unified gasp rippled through the park. Children stopped crying for their movie. Parents lowered their juice boxes. Everyone stared, mouths agape, at the giant screen, then at the real-life Brenda, frozen like a deer in the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck. The only sound was the frantic, high-pitched yapping of Napoleon the poodle, breaking the stunned silence. And then, as if summoned by the sheer force of dramatic timing, two figures walked slowly into the light. Sergeant Miller and Officer Davis. Miller took in the scene, the giant screen, the frozen crowd, Brenda on the ladder, and pinched the bridge of his nose, letting out a sigh so profound it seemed to draw all the oxygen out of the park. Officer Davis, standing behind him, was trying to bite his lip to keep from laughing, and failing miserably. The cleanup was swift. Brenda, in a state of shock, practically fell off the ladder into Officer Davis's arms. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of whispers and accusations. As Brenda was having her rights read to her, a process she seemed to believe was a negotiation, Sergeant Miller walked over to me. Lily was asleep on my lap, blissfully unaware of the suburban coup d'etat her father had just orchestrated. "You know," Miller said, his voice low and gravelly, For a guy who just plays strategy games, you have an uncanny sense of timing. He looked me dead in the eye. I don't want to know how you did this. In fact, please don't ever tell me. Just do me a favor and don't run for mayor. Just a lucky guess, Sergeant, I said with a placid smile. Glad the community could come together to solve the case. As the police car pulled away, its lights flashing silently, Gus came over and slapped me on the back, nearly knocking the wind out of me. You're a menace, kid, he said, a huge grin splitting his face. A menace to society. I'll see you Monday. We'll start running the new fiber optic lines for the school's internal network. Later that night, back in the quiet sanctuary of my office, I watched the local news report on the bizarre HOA picnic scandal. Brenda had resigned in disgrace. Her nephew's landscaping contracts with both the HOA and the school district were under official investigation. Justice, or at least the suburban equivalent of it, had been served. Lily padded into the room and wrapped her arms around my neck. Thanks for fixing the cameras, Daddy. Bike day was the best ever. I hugged her tight, the scent of her lavender shampoo filling my senses. Anything for you, sweet pea. She went back to bed, and I was left alone with the glow of my monitors. Before me was the full power of Project Nightingale, a god's eye view of my town, a tool of immense tempting power. I looked at the mosaic of feeds, the silent, sleeping streets, the blinking traffic lights. With a series of clicks, I began shutting it down. The feed from the library went dark, the community center, the traffic cams. One by one, the eyes I had opened, I now closed. Finally, only a single window remained active, the live feed from the new, legitimate camera mounted above the bike racks at Northwood Elementary, my daughter's school. A few weeks later, I found myself back in the school library. A new emergency HOA board had been elected. The new president was Mark, the insurance guy who had once recoiled from me in fear. He was sensible, boring, and his primary platform was ensuring the timely refilling of the doggy bag dispensers. It was perfect. I was, for the first time, actually listening to the PTA meeting. They were discussing library book budgets. It was painfully, wonderfully mundane. I was bored, but it was a peaceful, restful boredom, the kind I had once craved. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. A notification. I glanced down. Project Nightingale. Motion alert, Sector 4, fire lane violation. I hesitated, then opened the app. The feed from the elementary school camera showed a minivan parked brazenly in the red-painted fire lane. A clear violation. I could make a call. I could send an anonymous tip. I could probably pull the driver's entire credit history and voting record in about 90 seconds. The old Alex, the bored, frustrated Alex would have. But I just looked at the image for a moment. A mom was struggling to unbuckle a car seat in the back. She was clearly in a hurry. I smiled. I closed the app. The beast was back in its cage. I took a sip of the stale, lukewarm coffee in my styrofoam cup. And for the first time, it didn't taste half bad.